Welcome everyone to our webinar Connecting to the Current Reality of Refugees in Europe. Paul Sydnor is our webinar speaker for tonight. Welcome, Paul, and we're so happy to have you as our webinar speaker tonight. On behalf of European Leadership Forum, who is the sponsor of Focal Online Webinar Ministry, we want to express our deep appreciation to Paul for taking his time to minister to us during this webinar. In a few moments, I will pass the control to Paul, but let me just refresh your memory concerning the webinar technical part. You have to allow for your microphone and the webcam to be used by the platform. And this is of great value, especially during the Q&A. But please keep them muted while the main presentation goes in order to reserve all the bandwidth for the presenter and avoid any background noise that can interfere. Paul, we have the presentation for let's say 40 minutes or so, and then we will have a Q&A. However, during the main presentation, you can use the chat window on the lower left side of the screen if you want to post comments or questions. So please feel free to interact and be part of this webinar. During the Q&A, we want to advise you and to ask you to turn the microphone and the webcam. And in this way, our interaction becomes more as a fellowship than just some technical meeting. So today we have Brother Paul Sydnor. Paul is EU Director of the International Association for Refugees. He has been serving refugees since 1985. He served with Operation Mobilization for 1 year, with Slavic Gospel Association for 3 years, and international teams 15 years. And he began serving with IAFR in 2010. He's active in he's an active founding member of the Refugee Highway Partnership in Europe. And having served as a pastor, Paul's focus has been to help local churches to reach out to refugees in meaningful ways. Paul and his family live in northern France. His wife is from Germany. They have raised their 3 teenage kids in 3 European countries. And Paul is working on his PhD at Oxford Center for Mission Studies. We're so happy to have Paul today with us. Dear Paul, may God use you to speak to us on this issue, and we're so eager to listen what God has put on your heart. God bless you, and we are listening.
Thank you, Ovi. Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's wonderful to be here. I've not done this a whole lot, so I'm really happy to have this opportunity to share what God is doing among refugees. This is connecting to refugees in Europe, and we want to look at this subject in 2 parts. First, the reality. What is the reality going on in Europe? And then second, we want to transition into how can we help our churches to connect to this reality. So this is what we'll be looking at as we move through the material. There's just a few of us online, and so I don't think it's going to be difficult for us to get in touch with each other. As you have questions, you could feel free to put it in the chat box, but I do hope to take moments throughout as well to ask for your questions or comments as we move along. I also have several people with me here around the table, and there's maybe another person who might join us online as well, who I've asked particularly to share related to some of these issues as well. Perhaps we could just, I know there's looks like several others online. Maybe you could just type down in the chat box here just where you're from. I see where Drake has already added some information about his background. I realize that not everyone speaks English as a first language, so I want to try to make this easy for you. And so feel free to say where you are listening from. I'm here in northern France. And feel free to write in your location, as well as what brings you to this webinar. Perhaps you would say, I'm a worker, I'm a volunteer, I'm a pastor, I'm just interested, whatever that may be, just so we can have a feel of who is out there and who is listening. This will be recorded, so I hope that we'll have a chance to draw on this resource. There are a lot of churches out there, involved in this. And I have on the screen here now the resources, and I wanted to list these at the front end in case we forget to do it at the back end. And so I'm listing resources here that I'm referring to throughout the webinar. The first one is the Refugee Highway Network, and I would point this out. You can go there, and there's a wonderful map you can use to understand where refugees are coming from and some of the issues, stories, and so on. My own organization, IAFR, has a wonderful toolbox that you can go to, and our director has developed a lot of resources there, and you can go there and find different various resources. I'll be looking at one of those later. The European Evangelical Alliance also has a page dedicated to resources, and you can find very helpful resources there. And then the last three resources I've listed include asylumineurope.org, and then the Europe page.eu, as well as the ESO, which is also part of that page. And then there is a third one that I refer to in some of the graphs showing up, which is the Pew Research Center. They offer a lot of useful resources. So I've gone to these different sites here for my own information, and I've tried to list the source and where it comes from as we look at the various things. I would take this time as well to point out the Refugee Highway Roundtable, which occurs every year. And this is a place for people involved in work at the grassroots local level to meet others doing the same thing. So it's a place to come and meet and get ideas, share ideas, to see what is happening around the world. And particularly we're focused here in Europe. That will be February 7th to 11th, coming up in 17. And then as well, a major thing that the Refugee Highway Partnership does, which is a network dedicated to these issues for churches to be part of. That is 2 Sundays in June 18th and 25th. And you can find resources related to that as well on the Refugee Highway website. But by far, the biggest resource ourselves is the church, is God's people. And I just want to start with the story of the church in a small church in Calais that has been active, involved in this situation. And before this current crisis was even beginning, I was getting to know the pastor there. And I remember meeting with him and just talking about refugee issues and asking him, so could you envision your church involved? And he said, well, we're a small church. We're limited in our resources. And in fact, we already have active ministries in our neighborhoods around the church. And it would be really hard to envision getting involved in another ministry, but we'll pray about it. And they did. They prayed about it. And a year later, we were speaking again, and he said, we have prayed about it, and we decided to get involved with refugees. And this was before the big crisis really began, before there were so many refugees in Calais. And so they began very small. They began first with prayer. They began simply by saying, okay, we'll go into the camp and offer to wash clothes, and that's what they did. And there was a couple in the church that really dedicated themselves to the ministry, and they have gone into the camp almost regularly to meet people, to bring food, to deliver gas for cooking. So they built relationships with people over these last couple years, and they've helped to support some Christian communities in the camp there among the refugees. And so they have gotten involved, and the pastor was just telling me that he's so thankful for that opportunity, for the involvement, and he's only sorry that more people haven't gotten involved. And that's often what we hear, is once you begin in this ministry and engage with people like this, you realize that it's not just what you're bringing to it, but it's also what God is doing in you and in your church and in your own heart. That is so powerful. And so with that, we want to look at what this reality is that has such a huge influence right now and is such a major issue in the world. We want to look at the current reality and what is going on. And so let's turn to a few statistics here. This is from the toolbox page of my own association. And this is something that our director puts together, Tom Almondson, each year as a helpful tool. And he draws this from the statistics of the UN Division for Refugees, which is called the UNHCR. And I'll refer to that perhaps very quickly in the future, but that's what that refers to. It's the arm of the UN dedicated to refugee issues. It's the largest kind of working group in the UN. And we draw these statistics from there. They collect these each year. And so these are statistics that came out. They come out each year in June, and this is in June 2016, based on the previous year. So these are statistics for last year. These statistics, one thing you'll notice, it refers to refugees, asylum seekers, stateless people, and these are referring to displaced people. And so all these are different groups of displaced people, and the UN has identified that there are 3 solutions for displaced people in the world. One is that they would be relocated to a new place. Another one is that they would be integrated where they are, and the third solution is that they would be returned. But in reality, it's very difficult to find those solutions. And in reality, most people remain as refugees, remain displaced for years. And they don't realize that is what's coming. And that is the reality. And we don't realize that, but that is the truth. People are up to 20 years now on average. When a person becomes a refugee, they stay a refugee for that long. So that's a very useful and helpful tool. The global reality then, drawing from that tool, it points out that there's over 65 million forcibly displaced people this past year. 3.2 million of those people were asylum seekers. So that means that they are not in a country outside of their own country as a refugee, but they've traveled to a country asking to be accepted as an asylum seeker. So those countries are usually in Europe, North America, and Australia, South Africa. 3.2 million of those people. 86% of the people who are forcibly displaced are hosted in the developing world. And that's a very important statistic that helps us to do a reality check when we feel like there are so many on our own doorstep, and that there's a crisis level in our own countries. There are many other countries out there that have far more refugees. And so you can see 86% of the refugees, displaced people in the world, are hosted in the developing world. So a place like Lebanon, for example, might have as many as 1 in 4 people. 1 in every 4 people in the country would be a refugee. So it's an incredible burden that the rest of the world is also bearing. And what these statistics work out to be is that 1 in 100 people, 1 in every 100 people around the world are displaced. So that number over the years has grown lower and lower. More and more people are displaced. So who came to Europe this year? Well, last year, as we probably know, 1.3 million people came, and this statistic here was developed during that year by the Center for Migration and Policy Development, and they have shown that proportionately to the population of Europe. I find it a helpful way to visualize just how small this issue in terms of people, in terms of population and demographics, how small it is, and yet it is such a great issue in the person's life and what we face in Europe. This statistic here is showing the number of asylum applications that have been made in Europe over the past 30 years. And to me, I find it a helpful statistic as well, to just see the curves go up and down. And this is from the Pew Research Center, and they have placed in there where the crisis, the various crises over the years. And you can see that when these crises come up, the numbers will go up. And so it often is related to war. And the last year, it was, of course, over 1.3 million. One interesting statistic about this as well is each of these years will have, of course, one country that receives the most asylum seekers. And in the past 30 years, Germany, I was surprised to read this, to see this, Germany has received has been the #1 receiving country of asylum seekers. So for 20 of those years, they have been receiving the most applications. We can't help but ask, so why so many in this last year? Well, probably more than anything else, the picture of Alan Kurdi, the boy that was drowned and washed up on the shores of Europe. More than anything, that just touched the heartstrings of Europe, and it raised a moral dilemma. What should we do? What will Europe do about this? And so Merkel's own invitation was perhaps responding to that, among other things. But that just, the way that she invited the world's refugees to Europe, just opened the doors. And so that, it was an invitation probably without a plan, without a thought. And so as a result, so many entered Europe. This is showing the origin of the applicant last year. So you can see where they're coming from. It's really interesting to see that the second most area of the world of the asylum seekers coming to Europe is from within Europe itself, the Western Balkans, places like Kosovo and Albania. This is showing where the refugees are going to. It shows the destination countries, and Germany is the highest. Then there's Hungary, and then there's Sweden. And between those three countries, they've received over 50% of the asylum applications. You could point out as well in Finland, for example, huge dramatic increase of 800% last year. They received 32,000. The percentage of refugees, or the number of refugees in Hungary, increased by 4 times in Hungary last year. And 1 in every 10 asylum seekers goes to Sweden. So you can see, just begin to see how great the situation has been. They say it's in some places as much as 1%. There's a 1% increase in the number of foreigners who are living in the countries. So these are significant differences, a significant increase, significant changes that have come onto Europe. This is an important statistic as well, and helpful and useful. This is showing kind of the demographic again of the asylum seekers and where they're from. You can see the blue are the men and the green, the women. And then if you look at the women and the men itself, it breaks down their ages. And I would point out particularly the younger age. The majority are younger. In fact, in the women, it's 0 to 17. It's 38% who are under 17. And among the men, it's 26% who are under 17. And a significant percentage of those are unaccompanied minors. So unaccompanied children and youth, people who are here without their parents, who've lost their parents, as many as 2 out of every 20 of these youth are unaccompanied. So this is a really significant development as well. This is showing those unaccompanied minors. It's showing where they're going to. The green circles and the gold circles is showing where they're coming from. And so the majority of the unaccompanied minors have gone to Sweden and Germany, the UK, Belgium, Hungary. So these are the countries that they're looking to go to. And then on the left, you can see the statistic. It didn't all fit into the box here. But the tall one on the right, these are the nationalities of the unaccompanied minors, and those are Afghans. So nearly, now over 100,000 Afghans have entered Europe and are seeking asylum and protection. And I'm sorry, yeah, over and half of these are from Afghanistan. I'm sorry, it doesn't show up this whole statistic, what's on the bottom. This is showing the years across the bottom. It's showing the last 6 or 7 years. And so in the last year, you can see that it increased almost 3 times the amount from the previous years. And 50% of those are from Afghanistan. So just to summarize this current reality in Europe, the numbers have gone down significantly from this time last year. This time last year, 1,000 refugees, displaced people were entering every day. Now it's 100, roughly 100 are coming into Europe every day. The movements are shifting with the agreements that have happened between Turkey and the EU. The borders are closed, coming up through the Balkans. And so the movements are shifting. And so as a result, while there's been a huge drop in the numbers moving on land, there have been the same numbers roughly as last year, trying to cross the southern route across the Mediterranean. And so we have 144,000 up to September this year who have arrived into Italy, and that's roughly the same as last year. The majority of the EU population disapproves with the way the EU has handled this, and it's not been good. And generally, the efforts by the EU have been to protect the borders, to relocate people, to reintegrate them back into other countries, or to return them to their home countries. Those have been largely the solutions they found. And the problem with this is that it doesn't solve the problems. These are solutions really to address Europe's problem, which is its fear of outsiders coming in. So these are our efforts to address that solution, but not the solution and not the problems and the issues that are causing these big movements of people. And the dominant cause is the lack of peace and security. And so as long as there's no peace in the world, as long as there are wars and conflict, there are going to be people seeking peace, safety, and security. And this is why people are coming to Europe. It's not because they are coming here because they're going to find a free handout and lots of jobs and they're looking for this. No, they're looking for life. They're looking for peace, for security, for safety. And this is the dominant reason that they're coming. And just to cap off the sad nature of these statistics, here's the final one to show that the number of dead and missing people en route on their journeys is the highest, even just this year up to this point, than it ever has been before. Over 3,500 people have died or are missing. And so this is showing those different locations, mostly in crossing the sea, where these accidents and deaths have occurred. So this is the reality in a nutshell of Europe. And I wanted to invite several of us here that I've asked to share as well, just what this current reality looks like on the ground in place. And I have with me Kaylee Koditz, who's a colleague within IFR, and she'll be coming here with her husband, John, to work with us. And Kaylee's particularly dedicated to the issue of unaccompanied minors and is understanding that issue. And we were just in Calais. This is the camp there in Calais. They're in the middle of promising to take that camp down and dismantle it, to evacuate the people. And yet it's very chaotic how that is happening. There's a lot of miscommunication and no one knows exactly what is happening and when it's going to happen. And so, Kaylee, I wanted to just ask you, in your research and understanding these issues, what have you learned about unaccompanied minors that you think is significant for understanding the reality?
Slide over more here. You know, it is interesting, and just to give some background, I spent quite a bit of time in the spring researching the situation with unaccompanied youth and children coming to and moving through Europe. And that was followed by interviews that continue to go on with ministry leaders across Europe. And what is most striking in the numbers that you showed to us is actually the unaccompanied youth. So if you're looking at 100,000 children, upwards of from as young as 8 in the camp in Calais up to 18, you know, to be a minor. And when you're talking about the numbers that are coming across the Mediterranean, that the number on the boats haven't changed. It's the same as last year. But what we're finding has changed is they began reporting this summer that 50% of the people on the boats were children, the majority of which were unaccompanied. So we are seeing a very vulnerable group of people, the unaccompanied kids. And unfortunately, in the research and the conversations, what we're finding is their experience is different country by country. So because of that, the rules are different and the service offer different, and how they can move about is different. It becomes very difficult to provide a continuum of safety and care. And the result is we have a group that is targeted by traffickers. And it's exacerbated because quite often the youth will know, I'm supposed to get to this country. And that may be the UK, it may be Germany, it may be Sweden, because maybe there's family there, or maybe their family said, this is where a better life will be for whatever reasons. And so that is their goal. So they get under the radar. They don't necessarily seek out the official help where it's available, because they need to get to where they've promised their family they get to. And you can only imagine how desperate the family situation must be to send their kids out, their youth out ahead. And so the dangers they face that we were talking about is with trafficking, with the increase in slave labor, trafficking and sex trafficking, and even kidnapping kids for organ harvesting. And so these are things we need to be aware of, and we need to be thinking how to keep them safe. And the additional danger is, as youth are arriving in a safe country, the trauma may catch up with them. And I've been hearing in recent conversations more firsthand reports of suicides that are happening with youth. So the numbers are just numbers, but behind each number is a person who is in danger, and then we need to be very aware that these are young people traveling across Europe.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that. I also wanted, while we have this picture of Calais, I also wanted to ask a church worker there in the area, but she's not been able to make it online, just to share what is happening right now. And we know, and we're hearing reports every day of the plans to dismantle the camp and to evacuate the refugees, and no one is sure how that's going to happen. We were just there 3 days ago, and it seemed quite calm what we saw, but it can change at the drop of the hat, and then you can see reports of those changes, of reports of tear gas being shot or whatever. So we don't have that report from her. So I'd like to. We have another guest here with us, Christian from the Congo, and Christian is actually an asylum seeker here in northern France, and he's lived right here on the streets in Lille, and this is where we met, and so we've gotten to know each other a little bit over the past year. And I wanted to ask Christian just to share what it's been like for you as an asylum seeker. What is it like to come and to seek asylum and to be in this condition in Europe, in a place like Lille?
So thank you. The first time when we came here, we not think that's the reality life. What you see now, it's so different. And when you are here, the first is just we want to be protected, because in our country we have no protection. And when we came here, we think maybe we get no protection. We think maybe we want to return, and we cannot return because we have nothing. That is the first. And the second, we want also to participate in this life. We want, because we are young. We want to do something for this country. We are here not just to keep money or food. So we want also to give what we have. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. That's a wonderful. Thank you for that testimony. We'll have a chance to hear more at the end as well.
Thank you.
Thank you both for sharing. I'd like to just take, before we transition into the next section, we've kind of got a feel for this reality. We have a few people online. Perhaps if there are any questions, you could unmute your mic. I assume that will work by simply going up there and doing that at the top of your screen, or you could type your question into the box. So if you have a question, you could feel free to ask that at this time, and we could address some of these questions that you might have, particularly related to the current reality. These statistics are the reality of living on the streets, the reality of coming to Europe, expecting to be protected, realizing you're not, realizing that you're not even able to go back, and feeling like you're just stuck, realizing that you would like to give, you are here to give, but there's no way to do that. So that's a reality, and we want to move into another, the second part of this webinar, which is to address how we can connect to that reality. If any questions come to your mind, or they're listening, if you have any questions, feel free to just type it into the chat box, or you can unmute your mic and ask a question. Then I want to transition with a story. Kaylee and I camp in Calais, and we went to a particular location in the camp there. There in the background, close to those trees in the far distance, were some tents that had been sort of put into a square as an area for a youth center. And so we went there in order to gain some more information for for a project that Kaylee's working on, in order to implement that project. And so we found our way there, and we arrived at this location. There were about 50 youth, anywhere from 12 to 18, it looked like, there playing games and doing different things in this area. And there was a sort of a fence that was blocking people from coming in, and just a narrow gateway to pass through. And there was a man standing there with his legs across the gateway, and it was clear no one is getting in here. This was their space. This is our space for the youth to come and to be safe and to be protected, and for us to plan these activities and do these activities with them. And so we explained what we were there for. We wanted to ask some questions, and so he found a man who could answer our questions, who was working on a similar. So we began asking him about this need for communication among the youth, and as we were speaking to him, another NGO, they also had wanted time to speak about their project and how they could pursue their goals and their aims. And as we were speaking there with this man, there were the youth who were coming, and young kids who were saying, so you said that you would get us all a mobile so that we would have a way to stay in touch. So do you have my mobile for me? And he would say, I'm so sorry, you're the 20th person or whatever it was who's asked for the mobile, and I don't, because I don't have any money, but I still love you. Just because I'm not able to reach my goal to give you a mobile so that you'll be protected, I still love you. And in order to help them understand what he meant, he took his pockets and he emptied them. He emptied them and nothing came out, no money or anything. And he said, see, I have no money. And so he was making his point that he loved them. He wanted to give them this, achieve this goal, this aim, this project, but there was no way to do it. And so this is, I think, a helpful segue, a helpful story to move into this next part, which is really to think about these spaces where we are working. And how is it that we are going to come into these spaces where the refugees are, or where NGOs or organizations are working, maybe churches are working, or different people are involved trying to address the needs. They have their own goals and their own aims. How are we going to into these spaces and bring a message of hope and love and the message of the scriptures, the message of Christ? How does that happen? How do we, because we end up like this man in the camp, there was a huge gap between meeting the kids right there in the sand and wishing that he could give them a mobile. There was a huge gap between realizing his dream and his goal and actually realizing where he was, which was standing in the sand with empty pockets. So how are we going to cross that gap? And that's what I want to look at. How do we connect to this reality? How do we connect this reality to the reality of the scriptures and to the reality of God and Jesus and Christ and faith? And so I want to, this is not there it is. There, it's moving now. Sorry about that. So how do we bridge this gap? And I'm trying to introduce the idea that there is a space that we all work in. And there's a humanitarian space, it's called. You can Google it and find it defined. I'm very thankful for my organization. We talk about these kinds of things, and this is something we realize. In fact, my organization is developing a training to help churches look at issues that can help them to engage and to be trained and to figure out how can we best enter into this work. What are the needs around us, and how can we strategically do that? And so we think about that, and this might be one of the things that as IFR begins to develop and continues to develop this training tool, that we'll be considering these kinds of things. And I can't wait to get it out there and into your hands and offer this to folks to be able to benefit from. But this is at the bottom. Then you have this humanitarian space, and you can find in the documents out there, the human rights documents or the Geneva documents. You can find these phrases related to this humanitarian space. And I have taken these 4 principles that I put at the bottom as basically principles that kind of define this space, and they frame it, so to speak. They fence it in, and they describe it. And these are taken from the EU page. And these are principles that they've identified that are very important for groups to be aware of. Principles of humanity, which is reminding us that our work is taking place among human beings. That these are human beings, and I see that as a Christian, created in the image of God, and so we have a common core, a common source. Principle of neutrality, which is to say that we want to be careful that we're not showing favoritism and that we're not favoring one group over another. Principles of impartiality seems similar, but it's basically just to be aware of the discrimination that is out there, and to ask ourselves, are we discriminating in some way or not? And then finally, principle of independence, which is looking at our objectives and admitting and saying we want our objectives to be independent of any kind of political group or any kind of ideology or some agenda-driven focus or objective. So what are we trying to achieve? So these are principles that shape our work. And if you look at that picture, even let's go to the next one here. These principles, well, I'll bring up that picture later, but these principles then, as I reflect on that, if I could be with you in your own church or in your own setting, it would be great at this point to really unfold these principles a little bit. And so what does it mean? It means that there's a dignity that God has given us. It means that there's a respect that people should have, a common respect and recognition that we stand on the same ground and we should respect each other as human beings. And as we pursue things like trying to be fair and just in what we do and how we see people, that means that we need to be transparent in what our goals are and objectives, and we need transparent about what we value, about our values. We have values as Christians, and so we don't give those up, but we want to be transparent about them. We want to treat people equally. We want to be aware that people are not targets, but they are people with needs. That people with capacities, with skills, with strengths, with gifts, that they have something to offer. And so this should drive us as we seek to be engaged and seek to enter into this space and to assist. And so issues of assistance, how do we bring assistance in a helpful way? We find here, and I think it's true in so many of our contexts, it does not happen alone. We so need to work together. So there's a collective group that's involved. We need to include others in how do we do this in order to keep access, in order to find access into these groups. And so what we find is that there is, just like this picture shows, there is a fence literally around these groups, this humanitarian space. And you will find, I went to the camp once and the tents were first set up and there was no fence. Soon the fence appeared. and it began to be pushed in a little bit tighter. The tents had to get closer and closer together. And so it's true when they speak of the humanitarian space is shrinking in the hearts and minds of people. It's true, and you can literally and visually see it happening. And so that's the space that we're working in. And what is it that we bring to the table? And there you have it at the top. I think it's right out of the scriptures. It's faith, hope, and love. And it's also, it's kind of very obvious. Hope is what is, these things are what are going to motivate people. There was a forum for NGOs that the UN sponsored. The UN High Commissioner was there, and our director, Tom Alvinson, was able to attend as a representative of the World Evangelical Alliance. And he described how the High Commissioner for Refugees addressed this large group of religious leaders from around the world of different religions and asked them, you guys are important because you bring something to the table that the governments and other NGOs don't have. What is it? Tom said there was a deafening silence as no one dared answer, dared say anything. Oh, maybe I'll get it wrong. We might get it wrong. How can that be? And so the High Commissioner stepped up and said, I'll tell you what you bring to the table. He said, you bring hope. You bring hope, because it's hope. And that is what gives people resilience to rebuild a life. and to continue to keep going. And I think as Christians, we can so add to that faith, hope, and love. And that is what we bring to the table. Well, if going back to the man in the sand who emptied his pockets with the goal of giving everyone a mobile. So if this is our goal up here, faith, hope, and love, and this is where we are down here on the streets with Christian, how do we cross that gap? How do we get there? What are we going to do? Again, if I had time, we would unfold this together, and that would be wonderful to do. I don't, but I've got a lot of stuff here on the screen, and I think I will begin simply with just one of these, hope, just right there, the story of Jesus. He told the story. His disciples, his humanitarian space was probably his 12 disciples. He walked with them in that space, and there he was, the crisis of their life, to find out that their great friend and their leader was going to die. He not only am I going to die, denying me, and what a crisis, personal crisis to be in. And so Jesus had just communicated this to him, and so the next thing he says in John 14 is to say, don't worry, don't be troubled. He says, trust in God and trust also in me. And so our hope is all about helping people to find trust again. And they find trust in relationships with other people. And so I've got some key words down there. That trust comes from promises. It comes from a sense of belonging to other people. It comes from remembering what someone has done with you. And so it's built on faith. So these three things are really connected, right? You can begin to see. So our hope is built on our faith. We remember. So those disciples, Jesus is telling them, trust in me. And Jesus is telling them basically, remember what I've done. Remember all that in the past. I have been with you. And that's what that verse in Exodus, the passage there is about. Moses was told to go and free the people. And he said, I can't do that. And God reminded him, do it. I am with you. And Moses said, what should I say? He said, well, tell him the Lord, I am, has sent you. And so God is basically telling him, I will be present with you. And that's what Jesus told us. And so this is what we want to do as we are with refugees. We want to be present with them. Mm-hmm. And so finally, that happens for real every day through steps of love, mm-hmm. acts of love, reaching out. And so that's what our love is all about, is really responding to this faith. It's responding to this hope that we have. And so finally, you can see these three questions across the bottom, that I think are helpful for us to ask ourselves as we look at how we're crossing this gap. How are we being present with people, with these people in this space right here? What are we showing them about God? And finally, how are we making hope visible for them to see? As our friend in the sand, he did it. He basically emptied his pockets. Well, maybe that wasn't. It was visible, and it worked. And the refugees felt he was being transparent. Felt he was giving them all he had, and he was there for them. And so it was basically, you've got story here on one side and discovery on the other. And basically, this is all about discovering our story in Jesus, helping other people discover their story in the Lord as well, and walking with them through this journey. And so I think these are helpful things that can help us to cross this divide. We haven't reached the top of the hour yet, but I wanted to give you a chance as well, Katie, to just, as you think about your project and working with unaccompanied minors, what what helps? What do you think needs to be done in order to connect with them, in order to cross this divide?
Sure. I the two areas of need that we are that we can focus on with the unaccompanied minors is the tangible, the safety, and then, as you were talking about, bridging that gap, the hope. And I'm currently involved with a task force with the Refugee Highway Partnership that is focused on refugee children and youth. And of course, my focus, my bias is the unaccompanied. But we are working on developing materials for the churches to know how to connect well with the youth, to know what the needs are, and to know how to be present and how to care in ways that are tangible and also relational. And our ideal is to create a network of those who are working with unaccompanied minors across Europe. This connectedness that's missing from country to country, the church can fill. We can connect. And when someone arrives in Italy and is trying to get to France, we can connect with each other and make a phone call or send an email and be connected. One of the most important things to help kids avoid being trafficked, to know who they are, to see their face, to know their name. And we can all do that in our context. We can go to the park where the guys are, and if they're not there tomorrow, we can ask their friends why is he not here? And we can be a connection point. Being known is really critical, and the church can fill that space in our own communities. When we see these refugee kids, we can just be their friends. And one way to participate in this is to email us after this presentation. And Paul's email is going to be on there. I am Kaylee, Kaylee, @iafr.org. I'm happy to get as many emails as possible and help people connect with each other along the refugee highway, and also join us for that roundtable that Paul spoke of in Budapest in February. We will have a full day session about refugee kids for brainstorming and networking and learning. And that's where we will introduce this toolkit for the churches. And we are, we just need to pay attention to who's in our community. And Jesus said, "Let the children come to me," and let's see who those kids are and say hello and get to know them.
Thank you. That's so important. Thank you, Kaylee. Our friend from near Calais is still not online. So I think just to finish, I want to just also ask you, Christian, if I could just draw on that picture of hope and tell a story. Christian was over at our house recently for a meal, and we were talking about how important hope is, and so we were speaking about this, and so we were sitting around the table, and I asked Christian, so what gives you hope, Christian? And he he looked around like, he said, this gives me hope. Yeah. And so just being there together. Can you explain that more, what you mean? How does that give you hope?
So my first hope is just to be here, to be together, to talking. That's why I hope. I hope. So for me, hope for me is love.
Yes.
That's where we are together. That's why I hope. I know maybe this government can give me everything, so cannot give me hope. The hope for me, maybe it's from to God. And for me, hope is to be together with you. And I hope these words can change another day with somebody like you. I hope again. I hope again.
Thank you, Christian. So Christian is just saying that just to be together with God's people, gives hope. That the government can give them a lot, but not hope. And that's an important thing to remember. Thank you for that. Thank you for being here. We do have some time. If anyone would like to ask questions or to make a few comments, you're welcome to just up at the top of the screen, there's a microphone. You can push that, click that, and that will unmute your mic, and then you could ask your question, or you can also write in the chat box at the bottom of the screen your question there. We have some time for questions and comments at this time. I just want to give you a chance. I don't want to make you do this, but thank you for considering this. You're welcome to contact us again. I'll type in my perhaps you have.
Go to the next slide.
I don't think it's on the last slide. I'm just typing in my email there. And you're welcome to send us an email as well, questions that you might have, if you'd like to do that, or something else comes to your mind later. That is our webinar. I would like to just finish with a prayer. Thank you, Lord, for this time together. Thank you for these people and for your church across Europe who is in your place and in these spaces. And we pray that you would move your church to share faith and hope and love, and to share Christ, to share your story with people who are afraid they've lost their story, who are afraid they have lost so much. And we pray, God, that you would move your church to this. Thank you for this time and for those who've been here. Amen.
Amen.
So thank everyone once again for being here.
Paul, there is a question from Vicky on the chat window. I would like you to ask you to respond these questions.
Okay.
Do you see on the chat window?
Yes. The question is how our church is responding to refugees in Europe, and how do we mobilize the church in the U.S.? I would draw on what I know colleagues in Germany have told me, that it's been the churches that have really stepped up to bat a lot with the crisis, and so they have responded by finding lodging for refugees. They've opened up their buildings to teach languages to the refugees, and to centers have started up and things like this, just to do things of hospitality with the refugees. So they've done that in big ways. Here in France, a lot of the response has been giving clothing, giving food, and that's been a lot of the way that churches have been responding in Calais. They've also been efforts to go and help with teaching language. Other folks have gone through and they've brought scriptures to refugees as well, and have tried to share scriptures with refugees. So those are some ways that churches are responding. I would also say this, that we've seen that the first default, the kind of the knee-jerk reaction when we think of response is a transaction. It's you need to go and do something. But I think what we've learned in IFR, and our director has developed a wonderful continuum, is that's very much needed at one end of the continuum. But at the other end is the need for recovery. And recovery is more than just a transaction. It comes through relationship. And that's something that we're trying to do, especially to promote as well through the Refugee Highway Partnership, is the need and the opportunity that Christians have. It's built into our DNA, this idea of relationship. And I think that's the best way that church can respond. There's another, thanks for the presentation. I feel it's something difficult to spend down with refugees. It's work, family, and church activities. Yeah. So how do we divide our time? The comment is, how do we find time? We have to feed the church with the hope and respect towards the refugees too. Yeah. So I think there needs to be awareness on both sides. I think that's what the comment is saying here. So not only are we helping the church to realize what they need to do to become involved, is that what you understand, Katie? But they are the refugees themselves. So you're exactly right. Integration is a two-way thing. It's just not the church reaching out, but it's also the refugees, the asylum seekers, realizing that there are issues in the local community as well that they themselves are facing that shape their response and that make it difficult for them as well.
Yeah. If I'm also reading too, I think the comment speaks to that sometimes the people in the church aren't, when you say get it, aren't understanding how to connect. And we heard a wonderful story early this week about how a heart can be changed so easily. And it was, someone was sharing with us that there was someone who did not, in a church, who didn't have a positive attitude about the refugees in their community. And this person's daughter invited him to come along to an activity where there were young refugee men. And after spending the afternoon, his entire perspective changed. And I think that's the problem when we just share numbers and when there's a lot of fear in the media.
Just bring clothes.
Yeah, or just drop off material things, is we don't see the people and we don't realize that these are just like every one of us, they're people.
Do you have ideas?
Yeah. And so spending time with refugees and having a cup of tea, not just dropping off something.
As we said earlier, just be present. We had a colleague that said, "My ministry is to drink tea." My work is about drinking tea. Thank you for that comment. For these comments. Yeah. So just observing, we have a really big problem. Do you have prayer resources that could be shared with the church?
Yes.
Yes. If you go to the Refugee Highway Partnership, there you can find the prayer resources there. On the Europe page, we're just in the middle of transitioning to a new website. The old website used to have prayer requests that were updated from month to month. Sometimes some months were left out. So we have been trying to do that as well.
There's actually a prayer initiative that we're launching on behalf of the unaccompanied kiddos also. I say kiddos, that's a very American term.
These are
some teens and youth and young men and young women. But there's a prayer initiative that will be launched also through the Refugee Highway Partnership. So if you would like more information on any of that, feel free to email us.
And I think one of the best ways is to come to some of these events, like at the Refugee Highway Partnership, which would be linked on that network page. You can come there. You can meet people. You can hear the actual things to be praying for yourself.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for that. Great. Thank you for your comment. I thank you for all these comments, Verena. I'm sorry that there were not more, but I'm really happy that you guys are here. I'm sorry there weren't more people. I'm glad that this is going to be recorded. Perhaps we can share the link for others to benefit from your comments and questions. And again, thank you very much.
Well, yes. I just want to have a question or a comment regarding this issue, and I'm talking from the point of view of a Romanian pastor. Have you been thinking of creating a prayer network in which you can proactive inform the churches that are not really facing this issue of refugees in Europe? For example, it has been on our media, and it was a really funny event when some refugees trying to cross the border in Hungary. I don't know what happened, but the one that was leading them, they got them in Romania. And when the border police caught them and the media was there, and when they heard that they are in Romania, they started to cry. because they didn't want to come to Romania.
I think that would be a good place to come to.
And as you've shown, Romania is not on the list where refugees want to go, but Ukraine and Romania, for example, are two countries in which the evangelical church is quite strong, but unfortunately, probably unaware of this crisis. So I'm thinking about only having some information on a network or a platform or on a website won't get this information to the churches. So I'm wondering, what do you think that it should be done in order to make the church, I would say the sleeping church, aware of this reality? We see such a situation on our on our news, but from the point of view of the ministry for the church, probably we should know about ministries like yourself, and probably there are other ministries. And knowing this, we can prayerfully be more aware of this and support your ministry in prayer. So this just one thought as a pastor in a local church, in an evangelical church in Romania.
Yeah, that's a very helpful comment. I've made a note as well. Just this is something that we can talk about. We have work groups in the RHP, and this could be one that we work on. And I think too, as pastors, to teach faith, hope, and love, to teach the whole gospel. Not proof texts, but the whole gospel that stretches from the beginning to the end. And because I think that's preparing our hearts to love the stranger. We have the strangers are among us, even in Romania, and it's the same foundations that we need to build on that prepare us to welcome refugees and asylum seekers. So I think that in a way, just by preparing your church with these kinds of teaching, that some of the things that I was mentioning earlier is really useful and important. But I really appreciate this one, because that is a way that the church at large, from afar, can be involved through prayer, network, certainly through sending people, and getting involved in other areas, sending missionaries. I think those are ways. Thank you, Obi.
Well, thank you as well.
Yeah.
Well, if there are no other questions, we're just about to close this webinar. And I just want to thank you so much, Paul, for this challenging webinar. We want to express our deep appreciation for sharing your thoughts and your expertise and your heart with us. And may God bless your ministry and your life and everything that you're doing for the kingdom. I will just shortly send a link to the participants, a link of evaluation form. Please take a minute and fill in the survey. It's really helpful for us. Tomorrow, I will also send you the link to the recording of this webinar so that you can present it to others if they were not able to attend the meeting. Well, hope to see you again. Please check out on Focal Online the other webinar listings. Our next webinar will take place on the 25th of October. Do you have a hard time regarding and relating to others? Ken Sunday will be the webinar speaker on that date. Please check out on Focal Online, the website, and you'll have more information there. Well, thank you again so much, Paul, and thank you all. May God bless your families and your ministries. And have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Okay, bye.